murder case. A tale of two boys. One, a star athlete. The other sometimes wore heels and makeup to class.
They would tease him 24/7. They would beat up on him.
A perfect storm that exploded with a drawn gun. Did a schoolyard crush result in gay panic in the 8th grade? If you were on the jury, what would you decide? And why are some of them wearing wristbands with the killer's name on it? Classroom crush. And a popular teen and a seemingly safe older mentor.
You want them hanging around a chaplain and going to church and helping people. It was a no-brainer.
But was this self-proclaimed man of God teaching murder? An internet ad. 3 missing men.
Breaking news, a man's body's found buried in a shallow grave.
And parents trying to put the pieces together.
I think that he was in fear for his life.
And there is a monster here, but it's not my son.
Hello and welcome to 2020 on ID. I'm John Quinones. The teenage years are filled with potential risks. But what could cause a young person to make a tragic choice? One that could land him in jail for the rest of his life. You're about to see 2 stories of teens who found themselves in situations they could never have imagined, and parents left wondering how it all went so wrong. First, Brandon McInerney. He was a popular kid, but that didn't stop him from suffering what some would call bullying. And as Juju Chang first reported in 2011, the results would be deadly.
Oxnard, California, on the sun-drenched Pacific coast, sits just an hour north of Hollywood. But in many ways, it's about as far away as you can get. It was 2 days before Valentine's Day, 2008. Don Boldrin's 8th grade English class was just underway. Brandon McInerney had just turned 14, and on that day, he did something a little unexpected. He sat down behind Larry King.
We had been working on a paper in the computer lab. I remember hearing a pop.
Boldrin says she turned and had a horrible feeling.
It was very quick, but you could smell smoke, and I looked at Brandon, because Brandon was standing.
He was holding a .22 caliber handgun.
And I asked him what the hell he was doing, and he looked at me, and then he shot Larry again.
Point blank, execution style, in front of all his classmates. Dawn says afterwards, Brandon simply dropped the gun and walked out the door. Frantic, she remembers scrambling to get the other kids into another classroom and to safety.
I remember just screaming at those kids, get through this door. That's when I started screaming, Larry's in there. And I was screaming, it's Larry, we need to get back to Larry.
They had to stay behind locked doors because no one knew what the shooter might do.
911 emergency on lockdown. You're on lockdown. Why? Shots were fired by room 42. Who's the victim? Larry.
We saw police on campus, and so we had kids up in the windows trying to see what was happening. It feels like time stops. Because you're thinking, why would something happen like this?
The teacher and Dawn had to struggle to keep everyone calm.
And then I just started holding the kids. Some of them started commenting, he said he had a gun, Mrs. Boldrin. I didn't believe him. He said he was going to do it.
He said he was going to do it. That's what classmates would tell teachers in the days that followed.
Did he seem like a violent kid?
Never, no, absolutely not.
An 8th grader in Oxnard was shot and killed by another classmate, allegedly because he identified himself as gay.
The 14-year-old shooter, Brandon McInerney, and the victim, 15-year-old Larry King, were on a collision course.
It wasn't a perfect storm, but it was a storm.
By all accounts, they were polar opposites.
Brandon, to me, is your typical 8th grade boy. A jock, very sport-like.
Brandon was tall, athletic, and popular.
Karate, very active.
Not a misfit.
No, not by any means. And he was respectful.
Larry, on the other hand, was short, slight, and emotionally immature. An 8th grader who Dawn says read at a 3rd grade level and who quickly got a lot of her attention.
Larry was also described almost universally as effeminate.
He was soft-spoken. You wouldn't have looked at him and go, oh, he's outwardly gay or something.
Larry didn't hang with the jocks. He felt more comfortable with a group of chatty girls. One of them was his best friend since the 3rd grade, Avery.
He wanted to be himself. He didn't want to follow in other people's footsteps.
But Don Boldrin says however brash Larry may have been, he was just looking to fit in. Larry King was part black and adopted by white parents who say he loved bugs and dreamed of being an entomologist. Friends say Larry told them his parents were abusive, though they deny it. By the 8th grade, the often disruptive boy was removed from his adoptive home.
Larry came up to me after class and he said, I have a new address.
Did you notice a change with him at all now that he was living in foster care?
He was happier. He was more outgoing.
Friends say while living in a group home, Larry began exploring his sexual identity, like a lot of kids his age.
He wanted to see what it was like on the other side. He liked it. He liked the way he felt when he was pretty.
Larry began showing up in middle school dressed in girls' clothes. Students and teachers had no idea how to react.
Larry wasn't doing anything that was against the rules. He was dressed, using jewelry, using makeup in any way that a girl would have been able to.
But as anyone will tell you, middle school is an emotional tinderbox filled with raging, even explosive hormones.
How was he treated in school? How did kids react to him dressing like a girl?
Most of the girls would look at him like just one of the girls, and the guys looked at him like he wasn't human. They would tease him 24/7. They would beat up on him. He would go in the restroom for a while, and they'd push him into the lockers, and they tried to take his humanity from him.
So they bullied him in every way?
Yeah.
Dawn Boldrin says she knew Larry was having a rough time, so she decided to do something nice for him. She secretly gave Larry a hand-me-down, her daughter's old prom dress with green satin trim.
I bagged it up, and before school, very privately, I gave it to him. I told him to enjoy it, have fun.
Some might say, what is a teacher doing giving a dress to a boy?
There's a fine line in the classroom, and it's so hard because as a teacher, you are just seeing things with children that you shouldn't see and dealing with them in situations you just don't believe a child should ever have to deal with.
What she says she saw is something that happens in schools everywhere, every day. A tortured student, bullied for being different. But she's been vilified by some for giving Larry that gown ever since. Did the prom dress accelerate an already dangerous situation?
When you made the decision to give him the dress, you weren't thinking with your head necessarily.
No, I wasn't. I was thinking with my heart. I was thinking, well, how great would it be to have a pretty dress? Now, I know Larry wasn't a girl, but he obviously enjoyed pretty clothes.
Larry's friend Avery Lasky says it was a rare bright spot in Larry's otherwise troubled life.
Did you ever see the dress that Dawn Boldrin gave Larry?
Yes.
You have a big smile on your face. Why?
He acted just like any girl would when they see their prom dress. He was smiling nonstop, trying to show everybody, oh my God, look at my dress.
And despite his teacher's warnings, Avery says Larry flaunted his new prized possession. Larry created a whole new identity for himself and even asked to be called a new name.
It was just like a girl. He had an alter ego named Letitia.
Dawn Boldrin says she put her foot down.
I said, no, I'm not going to call you Letitia. I'm going to call you Larry because that's what's on my roll.
Did you ever warn him against what he was saying, what he was doing?
I did. I said, you know, what you do makes some people uncomfortable.
But there was one student who friends say was not only uncomfortable, but disgusted by Larry's flamboyant new persona, Brandon McInerney.
He would call him names. I think he had a hatred toward anyone who wasn't just like him.
Did Brandon ever threaten Larry?
Several times. He would always say, well, I'll get you later. I'm gonna hurt you.
After the shooting, police picked up Brandon immediately, just blocks from the school. Inside his backpack, a copy of Hitler's Mein Kampf, and 2 spiral notebooks full of Nazi symbols, and 3 strange letters, SSL. Was it a hate crime? Did white supremacy inspire him? Or was it something more personal? There was talk of a schoolyard crush. Was one boy's attraction for another a motive for murder?
Did he ever ask Brandon to be his Valentine?
Stay with us. On February 12, 2008, 15-year-old Larry King was shot twice in the back of the head by a classmate sitting right behind him. He lingered in the hospital for 2 days. After being taken off life support, he died on Valentine's Day.
He will be deeply missed by all who knew and loved him.
At first blush, another senseless school shooting quickly struck a nerve. Many in the gay community called it a hate crime. Talk show host Ellen DeGeneres took it personally and then took it national.
A boy has been killed and a number of lives have been ruined. And somewhere along the line, the killer, Brandon, got the message that it's so threatening and so awful and so horrific that Larry would want to be his Valentine, that killing Larry seemed to be the right thing to do.
Though he was barely 14, Brandon McInerney was immediately charged as an adult with first-degree murder and a hate crime.
I believe the DA thought there are certain crimes that are so heinous and so egregious that it's not appropriate to deal with them in juvenile court.
Hi, extension 143, please.
Reporter Zeke Barlow has followed every twist of the story since the day it happened for the Ventura County Star.
Junior high is an awful time for you. It's an awful time, especially if you're abused. It's an awful time if you're young and gay and coming out.
But what may have started as a case of schoolyard bullying could land Brandon in jail for the rest of his life. It took 3 long years to bring Brandon's case to trial, and as it got underway in July 2011, his brother James made an emotional public statement.
2 kids are basically losing their lives. It sucks, you know? Like, I'm sorry for Larry King's family as well. Like, I feel so sorry for them, but at the same time, I want to have my brother back. I don't know, it just sucks.
James says his brother never got in trouble. He was a smart kid, a young Marine, all wasted in a violent home torn apart by drugs.
Brandon's defense called you a bad mother in the courtroom. Is that fair?
What? I'm an addict.
Kendra McInerney is Brandon's mom. She says she was addicted to crystal meth while pregnant with Brandon. When he was 7, she was so strung out, she says, she sent Brandon to live with his father, who was an addict too.
He was beating him badly.
He used to beat the crap out of us all the time. If he had a bad day, he took it out on us, you know.
It's just the way his dad was treating him, and that he, broke his nose on 4th of July.
Brandon's father's drug-fueled rages reportedly got worse and worse in the weeks leading up to Larry's shooting.
And was taking it out on Brandon?
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
During that same period, Brandon, the honor student, stopped turning in homework and was moved into Don Boldrin's remedial 8th grade English class because he'd fallen so far behind.
He showed up in my classroom with no pencil, no paper, no backpack, nothing. He just showed up. And that was the first day, and I said, that's not going to cut it.
You could see that Brandon was a kid in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
At first glance, these 2 boys appeared to have nothing in common. But Zeke Barlow says the victim and his assailant were surprisingly similar.
There were reports that Larry has been abused as well, and then the abuse that Brandon suffered was well documented through the courtroom. It was very different avenues they were on, and it was this awful intersection that they met.
At Brandon's trial, classmates testified Larry seemed to be stuck in a vicious cycle of getting bullied and then striking back.
Mainly just call him names, gay or fag.
These are audio recordings of students' testimony from inside the courtroom.
I seen him chase my friend Jesus into the bathroom, but that was just because my friend made a remark against him, saying that, he sniffed the air and he said, I smell queer,
But just who was bullying whom? Brandon's defense lawyer made a controversial accusation in court that Larry was not only the victim of bullying, but that he'd bullied Brandon right back.
On a daily basis, Larry King was sexually harassing Brandon McInerney, and no grown-up did anything about it.
Can you help explain, though, how a 5'1", effeminate boy can bully a stronger, bigger, strapping athlete?
He was chasing boys around school with his heels. He was touching himself. He was doing things that are sexual in nature that you and I would look at an adult and say, that is inappropriate.
However inappropriate, friends say it was Larry's only way of fighting back.
Do you think Larry was sexually harassing the straight boys?
I wouldn't call it sexually harassing.
Was he bullying the straight boys?
He would bully them in revenge. He would not just do it for no reason. He always did it after they made him cry.
So do you think Larry was using his sexuality as a weapon?
I think Larry was not using his sexuality as a weapon, but as a shield.
But nothing could shield Brandon McInerney from Larry's obsession with him, according to his defense attorney. The rumor around school was Larry brazenly asked Brandon to be his Valentine.
Somebody said that he went onto the basketball court in front of all Brandon's friends, embarrassed him, and asked him to be his Valentine.
It's called Valentine's game, and you say the first person you think of, and you have to ask them out. And he said Brandon. And so he went and asked him out.
Avery testified Larry blew kisses at Brandon. Another student claimed Larry's crush was no secret.
He had supposedly told Brandon that he loved him.
Whether it was, hey baby, what's up, or I love you baby, something like that happened in the hallway, and Brandon was upset by it afterwards.
In court, the defense maintained that school officials were overly tolerant of Larry's behavior and allowed a sexually charged environment to become dangerous.
In the stand, a lot of teachers testified that they thought that something bad was going to happen here, and they believed that nobody was really doing anything, and that the administration was perhaps even coddling Larry and allowing him to express himself. So I think they really struggled with that fine line, and there's a lot of people now who say they just erased the line and let Larry run wild.
Don Boldrin was one of those who was criticized for allowing Larry to openly express his sexuality.
I think it's a mistake. I think a teacher that does that oversteps their bounds.
Finn Larson, the executive director of the Christian Educators Association International, has helped create anti-bullying policies across the country.
When a teacher is hired, they are hired to present certain curriculum. They aren't there to either to reinforce or to squelch sexual expression.
But Dawn stands by her actions, then and now.
It is my job to simply accept everybody and do what I can with everybody's individuality on a regular basis, support it, and try and get them to learn. And that's what I was doing.
As for the prom dress she gave Larry,
I did it privately. I didn't want to shove it in the faces of any of the other students. I didn't want it to be this big public grandiose thing. I wanted it to be private, and I wanted him to realize that not everything had to be big and in everybody's faces all the time.
But as Valentine's Day approached, some claim Larry's escalating flirtation left Brandon feeling humiliated in front of his friends. He was so upset, the prosecution says, on February 11th, he decided to bring a gun to school. The next day during class, someone teased Larry, who turned around and said, "My name's not Larry, it's Letitia." According to the defense, that is what caused Brandon to snap and pull out his gun.
He was a little kid who just got pushed to the brink. Got, someone that at that age with all that pressure and all that tormenting.
So in your view, he just lost it?
Yeah.
But the prosecution argued this was not a crime committed in the heat of the moment. In their minds, it was a cold-blooded, premeditated murder.
Their argument is that he was thinking about it and that he had the opportunity right away, but he sat there and thought about it, which gives rise to premeditation.
And what about those doodles and drawings found in Brandon's backpack? Could they be enough to condemn him to jail for life? There's one man who may know the answer. The DA couldn't find him, but we did. Stay with us.
There is no doubt that 14-year-old Brandon McInerney shot and killed classmate Larry King at point-blank range. And many believe it was Larry's behavior that caused Brandon to erupt so violently. But the prosecution is presenting another theory, one that casts Brandon in a far different light. Once again, Juju Chang.
For 2 long months, prosecutors presented 2 very different portraits of an 8th grader accused of murder. The jury would have to decide which Brandon McInerney they believed. Was he an unlikely victim, sexually harassed by a cross-dressing classmate with a not-so-secret crush on him? Or was he a homophobic white supremacist bent on killing?
One of the most damning things that I think they used against Brandon was his own words. Brandon himself told the psychologist that he was a homophobe, he didn't like gays, that the worst thing that could happen to them was that some young gay kid would talk to him.
A kid like Larry King. But reporter Zeke Barlow says the DA didn't just use Brandon's words against him, they used his possessions against him as well.
They brought out all these notebooks that they found in both his backpack as well as in his home. More than 150 pieces, I believe, of different doodles and drawings, and some were simple swastikas.
In court, Deputy District Attorney Maeve Fox tried to draw a link between those mysterious letters, SSL, found scribbled in Brandon's spiral notebooks, and white supremacy. She told jurors Brandon was living and associating with a hardcore gang of racists, the SSL, so similar to Hitler's SS. Jurors also listened to days and days of testimony on neo-Nazi ideology. And this man, self-avowed white separatist Matt Riome. Riome and Brandon's brother were once roommates.
I know you're not on trial, but how long did you live with Matt Riome?
For about 2 months.
You're good friends with him?
No, yeah, I've known him my whole life.
That's James at Riome's wedding.
He is an avowed white separatist, though.
Yes.
Was Brandon a white supremacist?
No.
How can you be so sure, James?
Because he has so many friends that are not white, you know, that he hung out with. Like, his best friend for his entire childhood is a black kid.
Matt Riome was to be the linchpin in the prosecution's case.
What was the link they were trying to make?
What I think they were trying to show is that Matt Riome educated Brandon on the beliefs of white supremacy, one of which obviously is anti-gay.
But Riome never actually testified.
DA said that they were going to bring him out, he was going to talk. Big part of their case. Nobody's been able to find him.
Kathy Listel is a private investigator working for the defense.
Should we see if we can find him?
She brought our cameras to this undisclosed location on the outskirts of Las Vegas. The DA couldn't track him down, but 2020 did.
And them here on camera with 2020.
Meet Matt Riome. Make no mistake, he has some very strong beliefs about keeping the white race pure.
I want to have a white family. You know, I love my family, and I want to make sure that our bloodline, you know, flourishes for as long as possible.
But Riome flatly denies advocating violence or teaching his racist beliefs to Brandon.
They wanted me to tell him, yeah, I told Brandon to go kill this kid, is what they wanted me to say.
Riome accuses the district attorney of looking for anything to tie Brandon to the white power movement.
They wanted to make him into a skinhead or a white supremacist, and, you know, somebody that hated Jews and gays and wanted to kill the person, you know, kill gays just for being gay. And they were going to use me as a tool to do it. They straight told me.
He goes so far as to say the prosecution threatened him, his wife, and his family if he refused to cooperate with their investigation. So he went into hiding.
They threatened to lock my wife and my dad out if I didn't tell them what they wanted to hear.
3 days before Larry King's murder, Matt Riome says Brandon did come to his door looking for his brother James, not him.
He showed up at the door crying. He's definitely troubled by something that's going on in his life. You know, I told him to be a good kid, sleep on the couch. You know, my wife gave him a pillow and a blanket, and we woke up in the morning, he was gone.
Matt Riome lived in a neighborhood called Silver Strand. Turns out SSL stands for Silver Strand Locals. But is it really a hotbed for neo-Nazis? We went there to see for ourselves. Silver Strand lies on the edge of Oxnard, a strip of land between 2 rock jetties.
Well, if we started the jetty here, it goes across down to here to the kiddie beach.
David Wentworth has lived in Silver Strand for more than 25 years. To him, this is a relaxed neighborhood with a strong sense of community.
Everybody keeps an eye on everybody else. There doesn't ever seem to be any problems here.
But prosecutors told a different story. They claimed the Silver Strand group, SSL, is a gang with neo-Nazi leanings. Matt Riome says that's not true.
I've never known it to be a gang. I've lived there for 30 years, and it's never been a gang to me.
But what about those symbols and tattoos some kids wear?
It's nothing more than
O-X. You know what I mean? It's Oxnard.
Danny Crave is also one of the locals. He's another friend of Brandon's brother and says the young Brandon he remembers is not some angry teenager with white supremacist sympathies.
I mean, Brandon was like one of the best kids on the beach. You know what I mean? He was the only kid on the beach that didn't want to party, that didn't want to smoke weed, that didn't want to drink, that, you know what I mean? Like, you wanted to go to school, you wanted to do everything right.
Brandon's close friend, 22-year-old Darren Larkin, who's part black, agrees.
He ain't no racist, he ain't no skinhead, nothing like that. He's a solid cat from the beach.
Randy Hecht is a consultant for the defense who spent 20 years in police and FBI gang task forces.
So if it wasn't a white supremacist gang, and you're not even sure it was a gang, what was it?
It's a group of kids. I've talked to probably 100 people throughout the course of this investigation, and nobody believed he's a white supremacist, except for the DA.
Locals here have been protesting the fact that the DA charged Brandon as an adult for murder.
Says save Brandon.
David Wentworth testified at the trial on Brandon's behalf.
He's done a bad thing, but he should be treated as what he was, a 14-year-old little kid.
But what explains why Brandon was carrying a copy of Hitler's manifesto on the day of the shooting? His 8th grade teacher, who traded in her school ID for a coffee chain apron, says she repeatedly offered an explanation.
I had been telling the DA, you've got this white supremacy thing all wrong.
An innocent homework assignment could turn Brandon's so-called motive upside down.
It was a World War II research report, and so each child had to have several documents from that report.
In Brandon's case, Don says he chose to do the report on Adolf Hitler, and he actually checked out that infamous book from the school library. When we come back, we sit down with 6 of the jurors.
The defense made a point that the adults let these children down.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I feel
Absolutely.
that 100%.
And why are they wearing wristbands with the killer's name on it?
Surely you're not blaming Larry for his own death.
When we continue. It was one of the most notorious cases in Ventura County history, which is why it was moved to LA County for 8 weeks of trial.
Hopeful, a fair trial.
I don't want to comment.
Was Brandon McInerney guilty of premeditated murder? Or was it manslaughter, provoked by Larry King's relentless gay bullying? The distinction would mean the difference between a life sentence or being freed while Brandon was in his 40s. The jury deliberated for 17 hours over 4 days, but they could not come up with a verdict. A hung jury, a mistrial, meaning he could be retried.
What tripped you up?
I don't think everyone was open to just looking at the evidence. I mean, looking at the evidence.
It was a 7-5 split for manslaughter.
How many of you believed Brandon should have been tried as an adult for first-degree murder? Not one of you.
These jurors agreed Brandon was guilty of the lesser charge, but 5 others believed he was guilty of murder.
How many of you were convinced it was a hate crime? Not even close. Why do you shake your head, Nancy?
They tried to present to us as jurors. It was, to me, way off base.
Actually, all 12, that's one thing that we did agree on.
Yeah.
All 12 of us agreed that it was not a hate crime.
Why?
They were really working on a report on Anne Frank and Hitler, and all of them were, and it's 8th grade.
None of them say they were pushing for a not guilty verdict. They were just divided over the degree to which Brandon should be held responsible.
Were you at all worried that a child might actually get away with murder?
I don't consider the sentence that we were told he would get after we deliberated and found out what it was for manslaughter is getting away with it. I don't think 20 years in prison is getting away with it.
What about Larry? I mean, there might be people at home thinking, boy, you guys, don't forget, there was a boy who also was murdered, shot in the head.
Forgot that. Never. Not as a group, not as individuals, never.
Larry's future was lost forever. Brandon's family is still trying to save his.
What he did is horribly wrong. No one's doubting that. I'm not doubting it anyway. My brother deserves to pay a punishment. He definitely does. But from the age of 14, from the rest of your life to rot in a jail cell, that's not justice in anywhere, Our entire lives were taught 2 wrongs don't make a right. So how does 1 life for a life make a right?
The district attorney's office refused to talk publicly, but said in a statement they believe Brandon is capable of killing again. The California court gave the green light for the DA to retry Brandon again for first-degree murder as an adult. But this time, they've dropped the hate crime allegation.
They believe this is a very clear-cut case of first-degree murder, and they are standing by that, and they think justice has not yet been served.
And yet these jurors are convinced there is no jury out there that would unanimously vote for first-degree murder.
So if it wasn't white supremacy, what was Brandon's motive in your minds?
I just think he felt he had no way out from the teasing from Larry. I mean, he's a 14-year-old boy who was basically beaten, from his dad half his life. So I just felt he had no other way out.
So Brandon would have been violent with anybody who was picking on him?
I think so.
What do you think happened?
I feel like Brandon was trying to rather really end the problem, not end Larry's life. I don't think he really thought that all out.
Victor, was it you who said if Larry had just left Brandon alone, he'd be alive today?
I think so.
Do you believe that?
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree. All of you believe.
Yes, yeah, we do. I think that Brandon was so intimidated by his peers to think that he might also be gay, that he had nowhere else to go.
But the prosecutor calls that a gay panic defense, a legal strategy California courts were the first to limit because it essentially blames the victim for their own death.
You're not blaming Larry for his own death.
No.
What do you think happened?
I think that there was a lot going on, but I believe that Larry was being bullied. I mean, I believe that people were, based on testimony, calling him inappropriate names in a derogatory fashion. But I don't think that anybody was stepping in and doing anything about that.
These jurors felt strongly that teachers like Dawn Boldrin created a double standard, a lenient atmosphere towards Larry's eccentricities while ignoring kids like Brandon, who were troubled in other ways.
I think Brandon got sent home for not wearing a collared shirt, but Larry could come to school in, 2 or 4 inch heels?
The defense made a point that the adults let these children down.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I feel
Absolutely.
that 100%.
This high-profile case revealed a growing concern among many adults, especially educators, about how to properly handle kids like Larry.
Middle schools have a tremendous challenge. Their job is different than it was 10, 20 years ago.
Eliza Byard, the executive director of GLSEN, the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Educators Network, works on anti-bullying initiatives. She feels teachers need to develop better ways to respond to kids as they explore their sexual identity.
The issues that all young people face have shifted younger. And absolutely, as young people decide to be open about who they are at a younger age, they are doing so in a context where adults need more support to know how to help the students in their care.
As for helping kids like Brandon, his mom Kendra has her own regrets. She's been sober for 6 years and even works in drug rehab. She says she's trying to make up for her mistakes.
What would you say to Larry's family?
How sorry we are that this happened. They don't get to go visit Larry, and I know that. And they don't get to go wrap their arms around Larry. And I think about it every day.
As Brandon approaches his high school graduation, his family is terrified of the day when he's 18 and transferred to an adult prison.
I make him work out.
Why do you make him work out?
Because he's not going to be in juvenile hall forever. He's going to have to go to prison, and I want him to be ready for it.
You want him to be able to defend himself.
Exactly.
As his mother, what are you thinking?
I can't. This is the most. I'm so scared of the day that I have to know that.
If anybody went and talked to him, they would see how much of a little kid he is still today. Like when I visit him, he is still very immature, he's such a kid.
Like Brandon's family and the locals in Silver Strand, these jurors are now wearing Save Brandon bracelets too. They also told us they're raising money for Brandon's defense for the retrial. And there's another person who supports Brandon, Dawn Boldrin, the teacher who gave Larry that green prom dress.
When you heard hung jury, what was your thought? What was your reaction?
I was elated, happy. And
why?
Because I realized those people saw a child. All the factors that were swimming around Brandon pointed to the fact that, hey, this kid was literally in the middle of a storm.
3 years later, Dawn says she still misses the classroom and her students. She may have started this trial as a witness for the prosecution, perhaps not anymore.
The DA is talking about retrying the case. What do you think about that?
I think they're trying to save face at this point because they know they screwed up.
But Avery Lasky says no matter what the outcome, she hopes no one will ever forget her dear friend Larry King.
Some affected him for good, some did not do what they should.
This is a poem she wrote after he was shot and killed.
I thought he'd live, but then he died. And in the end, he made us cry.
Brandon McInerney later pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 21 years in prison. He will be 38 years old when he's released. Brandon's mom reports he graduated high school while in juvenile hall and that many of his high school teachers attended. Larry King's parents filed a lawsuit against the McInerney family and the school district, among others. It was later settled. Meanwhile, the California legislature passed a bill expanding the definition of bullying in schools and requiring all schools in the state to have systems in place for dealing with the issue. Up next, an adolescent boy, his adult mentor, and a shocking outcome.
A man's body's found buried in a shallow grave.
Could their relationship have led to murder? When we come back. It all began when a man with a gunshot wound emerged from the forest crying out for help. Police say he was the intended prey of a serial killer or killers. As the case unfolded, the story of how the victims were targeted and the relationship between the two suspected murderers sent chills down the spines of many, including one of the suspects' parents. In 2011, Dan Harris first reported the story of a teenager and the older man who some say had him under his spell.
How did this 16-year-old high school junior from outside Akron, Ohio, a wannabe cop, a big, lumbering, popular kid named Brogan Rafferty, how did he get caught up in alleged serial killings where the victims were recruited on Craigslist? It's a sensational case making national headlines.
Fatal scam, the deadly hoax.
Breaking news, a man's body's found buried in a shallow grave.
Wait, is he scared?
Of course he's scared.
Brogan's mother, Yvette Rafferty, says her son is in this situation because he made friends with the wrong person.
And there is a monster here, but it's not my son.
That monster, she says, is this man, 52-year-old Rich Beasley, known as Chaplain Rich, a self-proclaimed man of God who mentored her son for almost a decade and who now appears to be the prime suspect in this series of killings.
I feel like I failed, you know. You know, do you want the peer pressure of kids, or do you want them hanging around a chaplain and going to church and helping people? It was a no-brainer.
For years, Chaplain Beasley cultivated a reputation around Akron as a do-gooder. He delivered meals to the needy, ran this halfway house, and ministered to people in trouble with the law. But police say the holy roller reputation was a facade. In early 2011, Chaplain Beasley was charged with selling OxyContin, growing marijuana, threatening his neighbor, and promoting prostitution. When he was released on bail, he reconnected with his mentee, Brogan Rafferty, and that, police say, is when the real trouble started. On October 7th, Beasley allegedly placed a help-wanted ad on Craigslist, $300 a week to watch over a 688-acre farm in rural Ohio. 3 days later, he allegedly held a series of interviews with applicants at this local mall. One of those applicants was Ron Sanson, an unemployed construction worker. When you met with him, what was he like?
He was all right. I mean, no bells in my head went off about him. You know, like if he's going to be, you know, a mass murderer or something like that, which, you know, he's turning out to be, I guess.
Sanson never got a call back, but several other men did. And on November 6th, one of them went into the woods for what he thought was going to be a job interview, but instead turned into attempted murder.
He turned to see a gun pointed at his head. He deflected the gun and ran. As he was running from the gunman, he was shot in the arm.
He survived and went to the police, who 9 days later found a body in a shallow grave not far away. The next day, they arrested both Rich Beasley and Brogan Rafferty. And then, on November 25th, police found 2 more bodies. When you heard a month or so later that people who did go for those interviews apparently got shot and killed,
Right.
what did you think?
I thought, oh boy, this could have been me.
It is yet another headline-generating crime spree linked to Craigslist, which has been used by rapists, robbers, and the original so-called Craigslist killer, Philip Markoff, the medical resident who shot a masseuse he met over Craigslist.
Fortunately, Craigslist is just opportune for bad guys because you can be anonymous. I'm not sure it's Craigslist's fault because it's the nature of what they do.
If these latest allegations turn out to be true, there are open questions about whether Rich Beasley sucked his 16-year-old friend into some sort of sick criminal apprenticeship, reminiscent of the D.C. sniper John Allen Muhammad, who carried out his killings with his young sidekick Lee Boyd Malvo.
He would had to have convinced the 16-year-old that what they were doing had some point or purpose. You can call it brainwashing, you can call it whatever you might. But looking at the D.C. sniper case, I interviewed Lee Boyd Malvo, and you could tell in the early days that he just worshiped the ground that Muhammad walked on.
Rich Beasley's attorney says her client is innocent, but Brogan Rafferty's parents are not buying it. In this exclusive audio interview, Brogan's father told ABC News his son may have gone along with the plan because Beasley threatened him and his family.
I think that he probably didn't realize what he was involved in until it was too late and over his head, and that he was in fear for his life and the lives of people that he loved.
Brogan's mother told me her son will have to pay for his decision to hang around with the wrong person.
I believe he put his trust in someone, and he's a very smart kid, but sometimes when you're not seeing the whole picture, you just believe what's, you know, that person is going to lead you in the right way or whatever. I have the pain for these families and what my son's going through every day. And he has to live with this the rest of his life.
Does he think about that?
Oh, I know he does.
Brogan Rafferty now sits in juvenile detention. In a letter home, Brogan tells his family he fears that when he finally gets out, everybody he knows and loves will be dead.
He'll pay for his bad decision, but hopefully America and the jury will see that he was just a scared little boy.
Both Brogan Rafferty and Richard Beasley were later convicted on 3 counts of murder along with other charges. Rafferty was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. Beasley was sentenced to death. As of 2014, both men are appealing. I'm John Quinones. Please join us next time for another edition of 2020 on ID.